There's this idea that media literacy is just as important as regular reading and writing skills. Imagine being not able to read or write in contemporary society. To me, it's just as important that people are able to read and, in a sense, write about the media, but in a sense, read and be able to deconstruct what it actually means within a larger kind of structural framework. So if you're just looking at media passively and just kind of taking it in, there's actually a lot that you're missing.
Well, and not only that, we want you to critically analyze it, but this thing that you do every day in so many arenas, whether it's intra or interpersonal communication, whether it's how you interact with, your colleagues at the McDonald's that you work at, or what you're doing in a movie theater. Like, we not only want you to explore that, but then, the reason that students come to college is they want to figure out what they want to do with their lives. And so the big challenge is how this thing that you do every day in terms of social interaction, we want you to unpack it, but now we have to figure out, and students want to figure out, well, how do I actually parlay that into something passionate for me for the rest of my life? Mm-hmm. And that becomes a challenge. Like, if you go into math, you're right, as a mathematician, I think there's kind of an arena of things that that you can do once you leave the academy. That's a little bit more esoteric when you come to communication studies, and I think for students they do get a lot of anxiety about that, and as professors we get anxiety about that.
Well, one of the things that emerged in my thinking is just how communication is the primary social process, and that without communication you can't really have social organization, social institutions, you can't really have a society, or it wouldn't be recognizable as we think of society or culture today. So it becomes a fundamental building block for everything else.
Understanding this will also help you work in a more diverse workplace. These are issues that you need to be aware of. Even just basic statements, you need to be really aware of what you're saying in basic statements.
Plus you have to consider who owns media. There's this assumption that media is totally democratic and everyone has access to it now, but there's still a lot of people who are disenfranchised, who can't afford media or can't afford a computer, and they don't have the technical skills or the cultural capital in which to even use the software. So I mean, again, it's another way in which communication studies is looking at issues of power and class. Not everybody can afford this laptop's $1,300. Not everyone can afford that, and then all the software on it's that's another $4,000. So it's who can that's not everyone just has the money to go buy that. Right. So I mean, we have to look at ourselves as being in a university as being somewhat of a privileged position.
If it's trying to understand the meaning of what you say, and then also they're connected for me, and also being aware of what you're saying and how you're saying it. But if you don't understand the meaning, the connotation, which relies heavily on historical context, right? Social context too, then you're not going to understand how to change it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean that's a kind of code that's taught in our society. You know, The Simpsons even, you know, they have you know, Apu works at the Quickie Mart, you know. So I mean these kind of codes, but I'm really interested in how alternative media could be made. Like you can actually make something that's an alternative to this system.
And produce
and
changes.
You know, and like
Right?
whether that produces social change or not, but I mean, at least the idea of like creating a kind of alternative structure to that system. The media studies program I went to at SUNY Buffalo was a very radical program. It was very about challenging, and it was very much about experimentation. So we would kind of look at those codes and then look for ways to create different versions of that, or counter codes, or even media that's in opposition to that media. Right, in some ways. But I mean, you know, YouTube's owned by News Corp, so I mean, that's still a major corporation.
Right.
So I mean,
Well, I just,
and there's all kinds of, you know, advertising tied in with YouTube.
Well, yeah, and if you're talking to the corporate heads, they're a privileged class, right? Probably pretty well educated, right? And then generally speaking, if you're talking to people who own farms, who are in more rural areas, they might not be as privileged socioeconomically. They might not necessarily that they wouldn't, but they might not have higher education too. So their life experiences are really different from what the life experiences of corporate heads are. So that is, and you're wanting people to buy Caterpillar, right? And so the way that you change how you talk about Caterpillar in terms of helping people farm better, for example, you're getting into a discourse around socioeconomic class.
That group is looking at employment in the organizational world, let's say. And if you look at all the research done by human resources managers on what they're looking for in applicants, it really boils down to 4 things. And of those 4, they're all communication related. You know, the first thing they're going to look for is basic presentational kinds of skills. That's essentially the public speaking. Can I do presentations? Can I be persuasive? Can I convince people to do things? You know, the second area is interpersonal relationships. Can I lead a group? Can I facilitate discussion? Can I be a good team member? Can I help resolve conflict? Now, those are all interpersonal kinds of skills that we teach in multiple levels of our classes. The third is critical thinking. Can I make an argument? You know, most people don't realize it, but when they go to college, they have made a kind of decision on the career they're going to go into. And it's going to be basically dealing with gray areas, as I call it, which means there's no right or wrong. It's a question of how I can make a decision and then justify that decision, or how I can analyze the situation. And that's critical thinking.
Right.
And, you know, in the argumentation class, the persuasion class, and a number of others, that's what we're trying to get students to figure out, is how to critically analyze a situation. And then the fourth one I talk about is technical skills. That's, for example, writing, computer skills, can be graphic design kinds of skills. Can I take my idea that I have and convert that into a message that's understandable?
In the fact that, yeah, communicate, you know, is what you're trying to get at right now, is communication studies is no one thing. It's just not. And a lot of the reason that it isn't one thing is because it has taken so many theories from other disciplines, whether it's sociology, psychology, English, history. There's whole sections on historiography where, you know, essentially we're looking at kind of historical theory, or theories of history. And it becomes the bastard child because you know, you have this thing called communication, which is so large and has so much depth and breadth that we need that kitty of theories from other disciplines to kind of get at the heart of what communication is. And because of that, we are kind of looked at as this like bastard child who is kind of bottom feeding and taking from other areas. But what I find is when we take from those other areas, we kind of not only make them our own, like say film theory will take things from literary theory. We not only make them our own, but we expand them in ways that maybe literary theorists wouldn't, because maybe they're stuck with just looking at the text. The thing about communication studies is I can take literary theory and I can apply that to film. I can apply that to film. I can apply that to everyday interactions. I could apply that to kind of a company and how it functions. So I think the misnomer is in the fact that we kind of bottom feed from these areas and we take. But I think what happens is once we take from those areas, we expand them and kind of give them back. And they've kind of, they've taken on new shape, which I find really interesting.
The key distinction, and I think this is one of the difficulties communication as a discipline has, is all the other disciplines that touch on communication, sociology, philosophy, psychology, business, all of those, really look at communication, but that's not the end goal. It's not where they end, it's kind of where they start. So they look at how communication enters into to do something within their primary sphere of interest. So communication always for those groups is secondary. It's a variable leading into or up to something else. Whereas the communication discipline, we really focus on that part of the process. That's our end goal, is to understand the communication. And so in a sense, metaphorically, we kind of reverse the flow. We look at how those other areas might impact communication, whereas they're looking at how communication might impact those areas. So they're looking at it from their perspective. From my perspective as a communication expert, let's phrase it that way, or scholar, we look at how multiple of those areas impact on communication. So it is very much a different perspective in studying the areas. And as you know, once you start to take a different perspective, you see different things.
Being more embracing of the critical ideas, I think, would be a really good thing, or just kind of engaging them a bit more and being like, okay, yeah, I really need to think about this a bit more. It's really, these things can be really problematic. So, I mean, I think you'll learn more and you'll come away with a lot more, as opposed to just always being like fighting it. Like, no, I don't want this, which to me doesn't make sense, because I mean, this is like such a rad, awesome program, and like the courses that people have here, like students here have it really good. I mean, these courses that are offered here are really interesting, and like there's a lot of schools that don't offer that. Yeah. There's a lot of schools that don't have this range of courses, and like the people teaching it really knowing it from this kind of critical perspective. It's really unique. But also there's ways, I mean, within this department, people can go on into the corporate world.